From the moment Janine steps inside the Lawrence estate, she senses that this is no ordinary family. The house is filled with oddities, paintings of wolves in moonlit landscapes, intricate carvings on the banisters, and faint, echoing howls in the distance. She notices how the family interacts, their conversations laced with unspoken words and glances that suggest a shared secret. Late one night, unable to sleep, Janine decides to explore the mansion. Her footsteps lead her to a hidden door at the end of a dimly lit corridor. As the door creaks open, the first thing she notices is the scent, earthy and powerful, like the forest after a storm. The room she enters takes her breath away. The walls are lined with shelves holding leather-bound books that seem centuries old, their spines gilded with mysterious symbols. Statues of wolves in various poses, howling, hunting, guarding, stand on pedestals, their eyes glinting with an uncanny lifelike intensity. The ceiling is adorned with a massive mural of the moon, surrounded by wolves in mid-howl, their silver forms shimmering as if alive. At the center of the room lies a circular stone altar, etched with glowing runes that pulse faintly, as though in rhythm with her heartbeat. Before she can fully process what she's seeing, Mrs. Lawrence appears in the doorway. "You found the sacred room," Mrs. Lawrence says, her tone calm but tinged with something Janine can't quite place. "What is this place?" Janine whispers, her fingers grazing the edge of the altar. Mrs. Lawrence's faint smile is both reassuring and unsettling. "This room is where our ancestors made their vows, where we honor our bond to the moon and to each other. For someone who doesn't understand, it might seem strange, but for us, it is everything." The next day, Janine is introduced to the expansive grounds of the estate. Bella accompanies her on a tour, showing her the gardens, stables, and the edge of the vast forest that seems to stretch endlessly beyond the estate. "Why does this place feel so alive?" Janine asks, her gaze fixed on the tree-line. Bella hesitates before answering. "The forest has always been connected to our family. It's part of who we are." Her cryptic response only fuels Janine's curiosity. Later that night, during dinner, Janine notices how the family's demeanor shifts subtly when the full moon is mentioned. Adrian, usually stoic, grows tense, while Jaden exchanges a fleeting glance with Mrs. Lawrence. That evening, Adrian approaches Janine as she stands on the balcony, gazing at the moonlit forest. "You must have questions," he says, his voice low and steady. "I have too many to count," Janine admits, "but I get the feeling I'm not ready for the answers." Adrian's lips curve into a faint smile. "You're more ready than you think. Tomorrow, you'll begin to understand." The following night, Mrs. Lawrence escorts Janine to the sacred room once more. This time, the air is charged with anticipation. The family gathers, their expressions serious yet serene. "This is a place of awakening," Mrs. Lawrence explains. "Tonight, you may experience something extraordinary. If you don't despair. Everything happens in its time." Janine watches as the family forms a circle around the altar. The runes etched into the stone glow brighter, casting an otherworldly light. One by one, the family members step forward, their bodies trembling slightly as their forms begin to shift. Janine's breath catches as she watches Bella transform first. Her human form dissolves into a sleek, midnight black wolf with piercing amber eyes. Jaden follows, his form larger and more muscular, his fur a deep shade of gray. Finally, Adrian shifts, his silver coat gleaming under the moonlight, his eyes glowing with an intensity that sends a shiver down her spine. The room is filled with soft howls, a haunting yet beautiful symphony that reverberates through Janine's soul. Mrs. Lawrence turns to her, her gaze steady. "Step forward, Janine. Feel the moon's call." Janine hesitates but obeys. Standing before the altar, she closes her eyes, focusing on the tingling sensation that spreads through her body. Her heartbeat quickens, her skin feels like it's on fire, but nothing happens. She opens her eyes, disappointment washing over her. "I can't do it." Mrs. Lawrence places a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Your time will come, child. The moon's gift reveals itself when the soul is ready. As the family prepares to shift back into human form, a sudden, sharp howl pierces the night, distant yet menacing. Adrian, still in wolf form, bristles, his head snapping toward the sound. "We're not alone," he growls, his voice deep and guttural even in his wolf form. Mrs. Lawrence's calm demeanor shifts to one of urgency. "Everyone, stay together. Something's coming." Jaden steps protectively beside Janine, his piercing eyes locking onto hers. "Stay close to me, no matter what happens." Janine nods, her heart pounding. Though she remains human, she feels the pull of something greater, a connection to the family, to the forest, and to the unknown destiny awaiting her under the moon's watchful gaze. The howl that pierced the night sends a wave of tension through the Lawrence family. Adrian, in his powerful wolf form, strides to the edge of the forest, his ears pinned back as he scans the horizon. Janine feels her breath catch, her legs heavy as if rooted to the ground. "Stay close," Jaden mutters, his voice steady but low. His gaze never wavers from the tree-line, and his protective stance beside her feels oddly reassuring. Bella, now back in human form, ties a loose cloak around herself. Her expression is fierce, yet there's a flicker of worry in her amber eyes. "It's not one of ours." "What does that mean?" Janine asks, her voice trembling despite her attempt to sound calm. Mrs. Lawrence turns to her, her regal composure intact. "Not all who walk under the moon are friends, Janine. Some have forsaken their bonds to the earth and sky, driven by darker impulses." Before Janine can respond, Adrian lets out a low growl. The shadows at the edge of the forest shift, revealing a figure cloaked in darkness. Its glowing red eyes and sinewy form emerge from the foliage, and Janine's stomach knots with a fear she can't explain. "It's a rogue," Adrian growls, his voice guttural. "Stay back." As the rogue wolf steps closer, a chilling aura surrounds it. Its fur is matted, and scars crisscross its muscular body, evidence of battles fought and survived. The creature's lips curl into a snarl, revealing sharp teeth that glint in the moonlight. Adrian and Jaden don't wait for an invitation. Both shift seamlessly into their wolf forms, their bodies taut with anticipation. The air becomes electric as the family prepares for the fight. "Stay behind me." Jaden's voice echoes in Janine's mind as he steps in front of her. The battle is fierce. Adrian and Jaden charge at the rogue in unison, their movements a coordinated dance of power and precision. Bella shifts back into her wolf form, joining the fray with a ferocious snarl. Despite their numbers, the rogue is unrelenting, its claws slicing through the air with deadly intent. Janine watches in a mixture of awe and terror. Though her human body is incapable of joining the fight, something inside her stirs. A heat rises in her chest, her heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of the battle. She clenches her fists, an overwhelming urge to protect the family taking hold. "Janine," Mrs. Lawrence's voice cuts through her trance. "Focus on staying safe. Your time will come." Finally, after what feels like an eternity, Adrian lands a decisive blow, his massive paw knocking the rogue to the ground. Jaden moves in to pin it, his teeth bared. The rogue lets out a mournful howl before retreating into the shadows of the forest. As the rogue disappears, the family regroups, their breathing labored but triumphant. Adrian shifts back into his human form, his face stoic but his eyes filled with an unspoken intensity. "Is everyone all right?" Mrs. Lawrence asks, scanning the group. "We're fine," Bella replies, brushing leaves from her cloak. She turns to Janine, her expression softening. "You did well to stay calm." "I didn't do anything," Janine mutters, her gaze dropping to the ground. Jaden steps closer, his hand brushing her arm. "You did more than you think. Fear is natural, but you didn't let it control you. That's the first step." The family returns to the estate, but the tension lingers. Over dinner, the conversation turns to the rogue. "Why did it come here?" Janine asks, breaking the silence. Adrian's jaw tightens. Rogues are unpredictable. They act on instinct, driven by anger or desperation. But this one, it felt deliberate. Mrs. Lawrence nods. Rogues rarely wander this far without purpose. It may be testing our defenses. Janine shivers. Defenses? Against what? Mrs. Lawrence's gaze meets hers, steady but unreadable. All in good time, my dear. For now, rest. You'll need your strength. The following night, Janine finds herself drawn to the sacred room once more. The glowing runes on the altar seem brighter, and the statues of wolves almost seem to watch her. She runs her fingers over the carvings, feeling a strange energy thrumming beneath her skin. Beautiful, isn't it? Adrian's voice startles her. She turns to find him standing in the doorway, his presence commanding but oddly comforting. I don't understand any of this, Janine admits. The transformations, the connection to the moon, and why I can't feel it like the rest of you. Adrian steps closer, his expression softening. It's not about trying to force it. The moon's gift reveals itself when you're ready. Sometimes it takes a moment of clarity, other times, a moment of need. Need? She echoes. Adrian nods. When your heart is in balance with the call of the wild, the transformation will come naturally. But don't doubt yourself. You're stronger than you realize. Later that evening, the family gathers at the edge of the forest once again. This time, the mood is calmer, almost reverent. The moon is full, its silver light cascading through the trees like liquid magic. As the family begins to transform, Janine closes her eyes, willing herself to feel the connection Adrian described. The tingling returns, stronger this time, spreading through her body like wildfire. Her skin feels electric, her heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of the forest. For a brief moment, she feels as though she's on the brink of something extraordinary. Her vision sharpens, her hearing amplifies, and her body feels lighter, almost weightless. But just as quickly as it comes, the sensation fades, leaving her human once more. I can't do it, she whispers, tears pricking her eyes. Jaden shifts back into his human form, his expression unreadable. He places a hand on her shoulder. You're closer than you think. Don't give up. Before Janine can respond, a sudden rustling in the trees draws everyone's attention. Bella, still in wolf form, growls low in her throat. Adrian shifts again, his silver coat gleaming as he steps protectively in front of Janine. The forest falls silent, the tension thick enough to cut. Whatever it is, Mrs. Lawrence says calmly, we face it together. Janine's heart pounds as she stands amidst the family, their unity a shield against the unknown. Though she hasn't transformed, she feels an undeniable connection to them, a bond forged not just by blood, but by purpose. And in the depths of her soul, she knows her time is coming. The tension in the air was palpable as the family stood amidst the forest, every sense heightened. The rustling that had startled them earlier grew louder, more deliberate. The sound wasn't just the wind. It was footsteps, heavy and purposeful. Adrian's wolf form stepped forward, his silver coat bristling under the moonlight. Bella mirrored his stance, her sharp growl echoing through the trees. Mrs. Lawrence stood tall, her eyes scanning the tree-line with unwavering focus. Jaden's hand found Janine's arm again, his touch grounding her. Stay close, he murmured, his voice low. The figure emerged slowly from the shadows, cloaked in darkness. It wasn't a rogue wolf this time. Instead, it was a man, his presence commanding and sinister. His eyes gleamed a deep crimson, unnatural and foreboding. Who are you? Adrian's voice was rough, his wolf form trembling with restrained aggression. The man smirked, his sharp features illuminated by the moonlight. Such hostility, he drawled. Is that how you greet an old friend, Mrs. Lawrence? The family froze, their collective attention snapping to the matriarch. Mrs. Lawrence's expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Victor, she said evenly. Janine glanced between them, confusion and fear swirling inside her. Who is he? she whispered to Jaden. Trouble, Jaden muttered grimly. Victor stepped closer, his movements fluid and calculated. You've grown complacent, Elizabeth, he said, his tone dripping with mockery. Protecting your little haven, pretending the dangers of the world don't exist. This is our home, Mrs. Lawrence replied firmly. You have no place here, Victor. Victor's smile widened, revealing unervingly sharp teeth. Oh, but I do. You see, your precious sanctuary lies on what once belonged to my ancestors. I'm here to reclaim what's mine. Adrian growled, his claws digging into the earth. We won't let you. Victor laughed, a cold, hollow sound. We'll see about that. With a final, chilling glance at Janine, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving the family on edge. The group returned to the estate in uneasy silence. The encounter with Victor had shaken them, but Mrs. Lawrence's composed demeanor kept panic at bay. In the grand hall, the family gathered around the crackling fireplace. The light danced on their faces, casting long shadows on the walls. Who is he? Janine asked, breaking the silence. Mrs. Lawrence sighed. Victor comes from an ancient bloodline of wolves who chose a darker path. They've rejected the balance of the moon and sought power through chaos. His family and ours, we've been at odds for generations. Why now? Adrian asked, his voice tight. Because he senses vulnerability, Mrs. Lawrence said, her gaze flicking to Janine. Janine's stomach dropped. Me? What does this have to do with me? Your transformation is incomplete, Bella said softly. To someone like Victor, that's a weakness he can exploit. Janine felt a pang of guilt and frustration. She had tried, had wanted so desperately to shift like the others, but her body refused to obey. Jaden stepped forward, his voice steady. Then we make sure she's not vulnerable. We train her. Mrs. Lawrence nodded. It's time, Janine. You'll begin tomorrow. The training ground was a secluded clearing deep in the forest, surrounded by towering trees and bathed in dappled sunlight. Adrian and Jaden stood on either side of Janine, their wolf forms imposing yet comforting. Bella was further ahead, demonstrating movements with practiced precision. Focus on the connection, Bella instructed, her voice calm yet firm. The wolf inside you isn't separate, it's part of who you are. You just need to listen. Janine closed her eyes, her breathing slow and deliberate. She tried to feel the energy that had stirred during the previous nights. It was there, faint but present, a flicker of warmth in her chest. Good, Jaden encouraged. Now channel that feeling. Let it grow. The heat intensified, spreading through her limbs. For a moment, she felt weightless, her senses sharpening. But just as quickly, the sensation vanished, leaving her frustrated. It's not working, she muttered, clenching her fists. It's not about forcing it, Adrian said. You need to let go of your doubt. Trust yourself. Janine nodded, though her doubt lingered. She tried again and again, each attempt feeling like a battle against an invisible barrier. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, she finally collapsed onto the grass, exhausted. I can't do this. Bella knelt beside her, her expression gentle. You're putting too much pressure on yourself. This isn't a race, Janine. The wolf will come when it's ready. Before Janine could respond, Adrian's ears perked up, his body going rigid. Someone's here, he said, his voice low. The group tensed, their senses on high alert. A figure stepped into the clearing, a young woman with dark hair and piercing blue eyes. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, her presence both unfamiliar and strangely familiar. Who are you? Adrian demanded, stepping protectively in front of Janine. The woman raised her hands in a gesture of peace. My name is Celine. I mean no harm. Mrs. Lawrence emerged from the trees, her expression a mix of surprise and caution. Celine, what are you doing here? I came to help, Celine replied simply, her gaze landing on Janine. She needs guidance, and time is running out. The family exchanged wary glances, but Mrs. Lawrence nodded. If you truly wish to help, then you're welcome here. But understand this, Celine. Betray us, and there will be consequences." Celine inclined her head. Understood. Janine felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps, with Celine's guidance, she could finally unlock the power within her. But as the moon rose higher in the sky, casting its silvery light over the forest, a lingering unease settled in her chest. Time was running out, and the shadows were closing in. The tension in the forest clearing was palpable as Celine's piercing blue eyes swept over the group. Janine felt exposed under her intense gaze, as if Celine could see into the deepest corners of her soul. "You carry a rare energy," Celine said, stepping closer to Janine, "one that needs careful nurturing." Janine tilted her head, confused. "What do you mean?" Celine smiled faintly. "Your wolf isn't absent, Janine. It's restrained. Something in your past is holding it back, a memory, a fear, perhaps even a promise you don't remember making." The words hit Janine like a wave. Could her struggles really be rooted in something so intangible? Mrs. Lawrence stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. "What do you propose, Celine?" "I will guide her," Celine replied. "Help her uncover what binds her wolf. But it won't be easy. It will require trust on all sides." Adrian's wolf form bristled, his protective instincts on full display. "How do we know we can trust you?" Celine met his gaze calmly. "Because I've walked this path before. I know what it takes." Janine looked at Celine, then back at her family. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady despite the apprehension curling in her stomach. Celine nodded approvingly. "Then we begin tonight." As the moon rose higher into the sky, Celine led Janine to a secluded glen deep in the forest. The area was bathed in silver light, the air thick with an unspoken magic. "Sit," Celine instructed, gesturing to a patch of moss. Janine obeyed, her heart pounding in anticipation. Celine knelt in front of her, a small vial of shimmering liquid in her hand. "This will help you access the memories you've buried. Drink it and let the moonlight guide you." Janine hesitated, the liquid swirling like liquid starlight. Finally, she tipped the vial back and swallowed. The taste was cool and metallic, sending a shiver down her spine. "Close your eyes," Celine said softly. Janine complied, and almost immediately, the world around her shifted. She was no longer in the glen. Instead, she stood in a memory, a fragmented scene from her childhood. She was in a darkened room, the sound of whispers filling the air. Her parents were arguing, their voices hushed but urgent. "She can't know," her mother said, her voice trembling. "It will destroy her." "She has to know eventually," her father replied. "It's her birthright." Janine's heart raced. What were they talking about? The scene shifted again. She was older now, standing by a lake under a full moon. A figure loomed in the distance, cloaked in shadow. Fear gripped her as the figure stepped closer, its red eyes burning with malice. The memory ended abruptly, yanking Janine back to the present. She gasped, her chest heaving as she clutched the grass beneath her. "What did you see?" Celine asked gently. Janine shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "My parents, they were hiding something from me. And that figure, I think it was Victor." Celine's expression darkened. The past is beginning to reveal itself, but there's more to uncover. The next morning, Janine returned to the estate, her thoughts heavy with the weight of what she had experienced. The others greeted her with cautious curiosity, their expressions a mix of concern and hope. "What happened?" Jaden asked, his eyes searching hers. Janine hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. I saw fragments of my past, things I didn't understand before, but it's not enough." Adrian stepped forward, his gaze steady. "Then we keep going. You're stronger than you think, Janine." Her heart swelled with gratitude. Despite her struggles, the family continued to support her, their belief in her unwavering. Later that evening, Celine called a meeting in the Grand Hall. The family gathered around the long wooden table, the flickering candlelight casting eerie shadows on the walls. "We need to prepare for Victor," Celine said, her tone serious. "He won't wait long to make his move, and when he does, he'll target Janine first." Adrian clenched his fists. "Then we need to make sure she's ready." "She won't face him alone," Jaden interjected, his voice firm. Celine smiled faintly. "That's good, because the only way to defeat Victor is through unity. Each of you will need to play a role in what's to come." The family exchanged determined glances, their resolve solidifying. Janine, however, felt a pang of doubt. "What if I fail?" she asked quietly. "You won't," Celine said firmly, "because you're not alone. This family is your strength. Trust in them, and trust in yourself." As the meeting ended and the family dispersed, Janine lingered in the hall, staring at the mural of the moon on the ceiling. She still had so many questions, so many fears, but for the first time, she also felt a flicker of hope. The journey ahead would be daunting, but she wasn't walking it alone. The morning air was crisp as Janine wandered through the estate gardens, her thoughts swirling like autumn leaves. The memory she had glimpsed with Celine continued to haunt her, the shadowed figure with burning red eyes seared into her mind. "Victor," she whispered to herself, tasting the name like ash on her tongue. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice Adrian approaching until he spoke. "Can't sleep?" Startled, Janine turned to face him. He stood with his hands tucked into his pockets, his usual stoic demeanor softened by concern. "I guess not," she admitted. "There's too much to process." Adrian nodded, stepping closer. "The memories will come in pieces. Celine says it's like unraveling a thread. It won't all make sense at once." Janine sighed, frustration flickering in her chest. "What if I can't handle what I find? What if it's too much?" Adrian's gaze was steady, grounding. "Then you lean on us. On me." The vulnerability in his voice surprised her. For all his strength, Adrian rarely showed his softer side. Janine managed a small smile, grateful for his reassurance. Before she could respond, a low growl echoed from the forest edge. Both of them tensed, their senses sharpening. A dark blur darted between the trees, too fast to identify. "Stay. Here," Adrian ordered, shifting into his wolf form in a heartbeat. His sleek black fur glinted in the moonlight as he bounded toward the tree-line. But Janine wasn't about to stand idly by. Ignoring his command, she ran after him, her heart pounding. Janine skidded to a halt as she entered the dense forest, the trees casting long, eerie shadows. The sounds of snarls and snapping branches filled the air. She spotted Adrian locked in combat with a large rogue wolf, its fur matted and eyes wild with rage. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but a deeper part of her, the part that Celine had said was restrained, urged her to act. "Adrian!" she shouted, trying to distract the rogue. The rogue wolf turned toward her, baring its teeth in a menacing snarl. Adrian took advantage of the distraction, sinking his teeth into its shoulder and throwing it to the ground. "Janine, get back!" Adrian growled, his voice guttural in his wolf form. But it was too late. The rogue lunged at her, its claws slashing through the air. Janine raised her arms to shield herself, bracing for impact. Instead, a surge of heat erupted from within her, unlike anything she'd ever felt. It was primal, powerful, and unstoppable. Her vision blurred, her senses heightened. She screamed as her body began to shift, bones cracking and reshaping. Fur sprouted from her skin, and her hands became powerful paws. In mere moments, Janine stood on all fours, her wolf form trembling with energy. The rogue wolf froze, its aggression replaced by confusion. Janine snarled, her golden eyes locking onto her enemy. Without hesitation, she leapt at the rogue, her movements instinctive and fluid. Together, she and Adrian forced the rogue into submission. It whimpered before retreating into the shadows, its form disappearing into the night. Janine stood panting, her wolf form quivering as the adrenaline ebbed away. Adrian shifted back into his human form, his expression a mix of astonishment and pride. "You shifted," he said, his voice filled with awe. Janine looked down at her paws, disbelief washing over her. I did." Adrian placed a hand on her shoulder. "You were incredible." Her heart swelled at his words, but the moment was short-lived. A distant howl pierced the night, a chilling reminder that their enemies were far from defeated. Back at the estate, Janine's transformation was the talk of the night. The family gathered in the grand hall, their faces lit with excitement and curiosity. "It's about time," Jaden teased, a playful grin on his face. "I was starting to think you were just stubborn." Janine rolled her eyes, but her smile betrayed her amusement. Celine stepped forward, her expression more serious. "The timing of your shift is significant. The rogue's presence wasn't a coincidence. Victor knows you're close to unlocking your potential." "Then we need to act," Adrian said firmly. "We can't wait for him to strike first." Mrs. Lawrence nodded in agreement. "Victor thrives on fear and chaos. If we're to defeat him, we need to stay united and strong." Janine felt the weight of their words. Her newfound ability wasn't just a personal victory, it was a tool in their fight against a greater evil. Celine placed a hand on her shoulder, her gaze warm but determined. "You've taken the first step, Janine, but your journey is far from over. Your wolf is awake now, but you must learn to control it, to harness its power. Only then will you be ready to face Victor." Janine nodded, a new sense of purpose igniting within her. For the first time, she felt like she truly belonged in this family, in this fight. As the meeting ended and the others dispersed, Janine lingered by the window, staring at the moon. Adrian joined her, his presence comforting. "You're not alone in this," he said softly. "We'll face whatever comes together." Janine turned to him, her heart steady. "I know, and I'm ready." The moonlight bathed them in silver, a silent witness to the bond that had grown between them. The battle ahead would be fierce, but Janine was no longer afraid. She was ready to embrace her destiny. The night was eerily quiet as Janine lay in her room, staring at the ceiling. Despite her exhaustion, sleep refused to come. Her mind replayed the events of the night, her first shift, the rogue attack, and the chilling howl that had followed. Her wolf stirred restlessly within her, a new and unfamiliar presence that demanded attention. She sat up, feeling the pull of the moonlight streaming through her window. A knock at her door startled her. "It's me," Adrian's voice called softly. Janine opened the door to find him standing there, his expression unreadable. He was dressed casually, but the tension in his posture betrayed his unease. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Neither could I," he replied. "Come with me. There's something I want to show you." Curiosity piqued, Janine followed him through the winding halls of the estate. They exited into the garden, the crisp night air wrapping around them. Adrian led her to a secluded clearing near the edge of the forest. "This is where I go when I need to think," he said, sitting on a large flat rock. "Sometimes it helps to be away from everyone, just for a little while." Janine sat beside him, the silence between them comfortable. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an ethereal glow over the clearing. "Do you ever feel like you're not enough?" she asked hesitantly. Adrian turned to her, his dark eyes searching hers. "All the time, but that's what drives me to be better, to protect the people I care about." His words resonated with her, and for the first time, she felt truly understood. As they sat there, a distant howl echoed through the forest. It was mournful, yet filled with a promise of danger. Adrian's expression darkened. "That's not one of ours," he said, standing abruptly. "We should go back." Janine followed him, her senses on high. Alert, the peace of the moment was shattered, replaced by the looming threat of the unknown. Back at the estate, the tension was palpable. The howl had alerted everyone, and the family had gathered in the main hall. Celine stood at the center, her presence commanding. Victor's rogues are testing our boundaries, she announced. This isn't a full attack, but it's a warning. He knows Janine is awakening. Mrs. Lawrence stepped forward, her expression grave. We need to reinforce the perimeter. Adrian, Jaden, and Jason, you'll lead patrols tonight. Adrian nodded, his jaw set. We'll make sure no one gets through. Jaden, ever the joker, tried to lighten the mood. Guess we're pulling an all-nighter. Again. Jason shot him a look. This isn't a joke, Jaden. Jaden raised his hands in mock surrender, but said nothing more. Celine turned to Janine. You need to stay inside. You're still new to this, and we can't risk you being out there. Janine bristled at the command but nodded. She understood the logic, even if it stung her pride. As the others prepared for their patrols, Janine found herself alone in the library. The scent of old books and leather was comforting, but it wasn't enough to calm her restless mind. She paced the room, her wolf stirring uneasily. A sudden movement caught her eye. She turned to see Bella standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. You're not used to being sidelined, are you? Bella asked. Janine shook her head. I hate feeling useless. Bella stepped into the room, her presence both intimidating and reassuring. You're not useless. You're new. There's a difference. Then teach me, Janine said, her voice firm. Help me get better. Bella studied her for a moment before nodding. Fine, but don't expect me to go easy on you. The next morning, Bella led Janine to a secluded training area deep within the forest. It was a wide clearing surrounded by tall trees, with patches of soft moss covering the ground. First rule, Bella began, tossing a wooden staff to Janine. You need to learn control. Your wolf is powerful, but without control, you're a danger to yourself and everyone around you. Janine caught the staff awkwardly, the weight of it unfamiliar. And the second rule? Never let your emotions dictate your actions, Bella said, circling her like a predator. Anger, fear, even excitement, they can all cloud your judgment. The training began slowly, with Bella demonstrating basic moves and Janine mimicking them. But as the session progressed, Bella pushed harder, testing Janine's limits. Faster, Bella barked as Janine swung the staff. You're too slow. Sweat dripped down Janine's face, her muscles burning with exertion. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. When Bella finally called for a break, Janine collapsed onto the mossy ground, breathing heavily. You've got potential, Bella admitted grudgingly, but you're holding back. Janine looked up at her, confused. What do you mean? Bella crouched beside her, her gaze intense. You're afraid of your own power. You think if you let go, you'll lose control. But that fear is what's holding you back. Janine swallowed hard, Bella's words striking a chord. She thought back to her transformation the night before, the raw power she had felt. Was she afraid of it? I'll do better, she promised. Bella smirked. You'd better, because Victor won't show mercy. As they made their way back to the estate, Janine felt a new determination settle over her. The fight against Victor was drawing closer, and she would be ready. She had to be. The estate hummed with activity as the family prepared for what felt like an inevitable clash with Victor. Patrols were tighter, strategies were revised, and every moment was spent fortifying their defenses. Janine, still new to this world, observed everything with a mix of awe and apprehension. Her training with Bella continued, growing more intense with each passing day. Bruises covered her arms, and her muscles ached, but she was learning. She could feel her reflexes sharpening, her instincts taking root. One evening, after another grueling session, Janine found herself in the kitchen, rummaging for a snack. The scent of spices and freshly baked bread filled the air, a comforting contrast to the tension that seemed to seep into every corner of the estate. You're pushing yourself too hard, a voice said behind her. She turned to see Adrian leaning against the doorframe, his expression softer than usual. I have to, she replied, setting down the loaf of bread she'd been slicing. I can't afford to be weak. Adrian stepped closer, his presence commanding yet oddly comforting. "Being strong doesn't mean you have to break yourself, Janine." His words struck a nerve, but before she could respond, the sound of raised voices echoed from the main hall. Adrian tensed immediately, his protective instincts kicking in. "Stay here," he ordered, but Janine was already following him. When they arrived, they found Jason and Jaden in a heated argument. Jason's face was flushed with anger, while Jaden's usual smirk was nowhere to be seen. "You're reckless, Jaden," Jason snapped. "Do you even think about the consequences of your actions?" "I was scouting," Jaden shot back. "I wasn't going to sit around while we wait for Victor to strike first." "Enough." Celine's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Her icy glare silenced them both. "What happened?" Adrian asked, his tone steady but laced with concern. Jaden sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I spotted some of Victor's rogues near the eastern border. They're getting bolder." Celine's expression hardened. "Then we need to be ready. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about the entire pack." Janine felt the weight of her words, the reality of their situation sinking in deeper. Later that night, unable to sleep, Janine wandered the halls of the estate. Her feet carried her to the library, where the faint glow of a lamp revealed Mrs. Lawrence sitting at a desk, a worn journal in her hands. "Couldn't sleep either?" Mrs. Lawrence asked without looking up. Janine shook her head, stepping closer. "What are you reading?" Mrs. Lawrence closed the journal gently, a wistful smile playing on her lips. "The writings of one of our ancestors. She lived through a time of great turmoil, much like what we're facing now." Janine hesitated before asking, "Do you think we'll win?" Mrs. Lawrence's eyes met hers, filled with a quiet strength. "Victory isn't always guaranteed, Janine, but what matters is that we fight for what's right." She gestured for Janine to sit, and after a moment's hesitation, Janine did. "You're stronger than you realize," Mrs. Lawrence said, "but strength isn't just about power or skill. It's about knowing who you are and standing firm, even when the world tries to tear you down." Janine nodded, her chest tightening with emotion. She wanted to believe those words, but doubt lingered like a shadow in her mind. The next morning, the family gathered in the great hall. Celine stood at the head of the table, her presence commanding as always. "We've received word from one of our scouts," she began. "Victor is planning an attack. He's testing our defenses now, but soon he'll make his move." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. "Do we know when?" Adrian asked. Celine shook her head. "Not yet, but we can't afford to wait. We need to take the fight to him." The room buzzed with a mix of fear and determination. Janine felt a surge of adrenaline, her wolf stirring within her. "What about me?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty she felt. "What can I do?" Celine studied her for a moment before speaking. "You're not ready to fight, but there's something else you can do. Victor isn't just a threat to us, he's a threat to the entire pack. We need to warn the others." "You want me to deliver the message?" Janine asked, surprised. Celine nodded. "You're new, which means Victor doesn't know you yet. You'll be able to move more freely than the rest of us." Janine swallowed hard, the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her. But she nodded. "I'll do it." Adrian stepped forward, his expression serious. "I'll go with her." Celine hesitated, but eventually nodded. "Be careful, both of you. This mission is critical." As Janine prepared to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The fight against Victor was far from over, and she had a sinking suspicion that things were about to get much worse. Janine and Adrian set off at dawn, their journey cloaked in the soft golden light of the rising sun. The air was crisp, and the forest seemed alive with energy, a stark contrast to the heaviness that lingered in Janine's heart. Adrian led the way, his sharp eyes scanning their surroundings for any signs of danger. Despite his calm demeanor, Janine could sense the tension in him. "Do you think Victor will target us on the way?" she asked, breaking the silence. "It's possible," Adrian replied, his voice low, "but we're taking less obvious routes. If we stay alert, we'll be fine." They walked in silence for a while, the crunch of leaves beneath their feet the only sound. Janine couldn't help but steal glances at Adrian. There was something about him. His unwavering focus, the way he seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders, that intrigued her. "Do you ever get tired of all this?" she asked suddenly. Adrian glanced at her, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "The responsibility, the constant danger. Doesn't it ever feel like too much?" He considered her question for a moment before answering. "It does, but I've learned that running from it doesn't help. You face it, one step at a time." Janine nodded, his words resonating with her. She had spent so much of her life avoiding challenges, but now there was no running away. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the forest in shades of orange and gold, Adrian motioned for them to stop. "We'll rest here for a bit," he said, his eyes scanning the area for threats. Janine sat on a fallen log, grateful for the break. Her legs ached, and her mind was swirling with thoughts of the mission ahead. Adrian handed her a canteen of water and sat beside her, his gaze fixed on the darkening sky. "You're doing well," he said after a moment. Janine blinked, surprised by the compliment. "Thanks. I'm just trying to keep up." Before Adrian could respond, a rustling sound came from the bushes nearby. Both of them tensed, their senses on high alert. From the shadows emerged a lone wolf, its fur matted and its eyes glowing with an unnatural red hue. "Rogue," Adrian muttered, rising to his feet. Janine's heart raced as the wolf snarled, its teeth bared. She could feel her wolf stirring within her, urging her to fight. Adrian stepped forward, his body poised for a shift. "Stay back," he told Janine. But before he could transform, the rogue lunged. Janine didn't think, she acted. Grabbing a fallen branch, she swung it with all her might, hitting the wolf in the side. It yelped in pain but quickly recovered, its glowing eyes locking onto her. Adrian shifted in a flash, his wolf form leaping between Janine and the rogue. The two wolves clashed in a flurry of teeth and claws, the air filled with growls and the sound of snapping jaws. Janine watched, frozen with fear and awe, as Adrian fought with a ferocity she had never seen before. Finally, Adrian delivered a powerful blow, sending the rogue crashing to the ground. It whimpered before retreating into the shadows, its glowing eyes disappearing into the night. Adrian shifted back, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice rough. Janine nodded, her hands trembling. "Yeah, thanks to you." Adrian gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You held your own back there. I'm impressed." By the time they reached the edge of the pack's territory, it was well into the night. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a silver glow over the landscape. Adrian stopped, his expression serious. "This is it. Once we cross into their territory, we need to be cautious. They might not take kindly to unexpected visitors." Janine nodded, her heart pounding. This was the first time she would be meeting another pack, and she wasn't sure what to expect. They crossed the boundary, and almost immediately, they were met by two wolves who stepped out of the shadows, their eyes sharp and assessing. Adrian raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "We come with a message from Celine Lawrence. It's urgent." The wolves exchanged a look before one of them shifted into human form, a tall man with dark hair and piercing eyes. "Follow me," he said curtly. Janine and Adrian were led to the pack's meeting hall, a large wooden structure lit by torches. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of pine and earth. The pack's alpha, a stern-looking woman with silver streaks in her hair, listened intently as Adrian relayed Celine's message. "Victor's rogues are growing in number," he explained. "If we don't stand together, he'll pick us off one by one." The alpha's eyes narrowed. "And why should we trust the Lawrences? Your family hasn't exactly been forthcoming with us in the past." Adrian's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Janine stepped forward. "Because this isn't just about the Lawrences," she said, her voice steady. "It's about all of us. Victor doesn't care about alliances or rivalries. If we don't unite, we'll all fall." The Alpha studied her for a long moment before nodding. "You've got courage, girl. We'll consider your proposal." As they left the meeting hall, Janine felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a start. "You were amazing back there," Adrian said as they walked back toward the forest. Janine smiled, her confidence growing. "Thanks. I just said what needed to be said." Adrian chuckled. "You're a natural leader, Janine. Don't forget that." The moonlight filtered through the trees as Janine and Adrian made their way back to their camp. Despite the successful meeting with the neighboring pack, the air between them was tense with unspoken words. Adrian glanced at Janine, his expression thoughtful. "You handled yourself well in there. I wasn't expecting you to step in like that." Janine shrugged, but a small smile tugged at her lips. "I couldn't just stand by while she questioned you. We need them on our side." He nodded, his gaze softening. "You're right, and you have a way of cutting through the noise. It's impressive." Janine felt her cheeks warm, but she quickly looked away, focusing on the path ahead. "We still have a long way to go. Convincing one pack is a start, but Victor isn't going to back down easily." Adrian's jaw tightened, and he stopped walking, turning to face her. "Janine, I need you to know something. If it comes down to it, I'll do whatever it takes to protect you, no matter what." The intensity in his voice made her heart skip a beat. She met his gaze, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "I know, Adrian, and I'll do the same for you. We're in this together." For a moment, the world seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them. But the distant howl of a rogue shattered the silence, pulling them back to reality. "We should keep moving," Adrian said, his voice laced with urgency. Janine nodded, her resolve hardening. The storm was coming, and they needed to be ready. The next morning, they were awoken by the sound of rustling leaves and hurried footsteps. Jason and Bella burst into the clearing, their faces pale. "Victor's rogues," Jason panted. "They're coming. They're just a few miles out." Adrian sprang to his feet, his expression grim. "How many?" "At least 20, Bella replied, her voice trembling. "Maybe more." Janine's heart raced. They were outnumbered, and the neighboring pack hadn't yet committed to joining their fight. "We have to warn the others," Adrian said, already shifting into his wolf form. The group raced back to the Lawrence estate, their wolves moving swiftly through the forest. When they arrived, Celine was already organizing the pack, her commanding presence rallying everyone. "Victor is testing our strength," she said, her voice firm. "We will not give him the satisfaction of finding us unprepared. Defend your home, your family, and your honor." Janine felt a surge of pride as she watched Celine. This was what a true leader looked like. As the pack prepared for battle, Adrian pulled Janine aside. "Stay close to me. I won't let anything happen to you." Janine nodded, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure if her wolf would emerge in time to help, but she refused to be a liability. When the rogues attacked, it was chaos. Wolves clashed in a blur of teeth and claws, the air filled with growls and snarls. Janine fought alongside Adrian, using everything she had learned during her training. She dodged, struck, and defended, her human instincts blending with her wolf's growing strength. In the midst of the battle, she spotted Victor, a towering wolf with midnight black fur and piercing red eyes. He moved with deadly precision, cutting down anyone in his path. Janine's blood ran cold as Victor's gaze locked onto her. Victor lunged toward Janine, his jaws snapping. She barely managed to dodge, her body reacting on instinct. "Janine!" Adrian roared, but he was too far away to reach her in time. Victor circled her, his growl low and menacing. "You're the one they're so desperate to protect," he sneered. "Let's see if you're worth the trouble." Janine's fear gave way to anger. She could feel something stirring deep within her, a heat building, a power, demanding to be unleashed. Victor charged again, but this time, Janine didn't move away. She stood her ground, her hands clenched into fists. And then it happened. The heat exploded, coursing through her veins like wildfire. Her vision blurred, and she felt her body shift, bones reshaping and muscles rippling. When the transformation was complete, she stood tall on 4 powerful legs, her fur a radiant silver that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. Victor froze, his eyes widening in shock. Janine let out a fierce howl, the sound echoing through the forest. The pack, hearing her call, rallied with renewed strength. Adrian reached her side, his wolf form battered but determined. "You did it," he said, pride shining in his eyes. Janine didn't have time to respond. Victor lunged again, but this time, she met him head-on. Their bodies collided, and they tumbled to the ground, a flurry of claws and teeth. Despite his strength, Victor was no match for Janine's newfound power. With a final, decisive blow, she sent him crashing to the ground. Victor struggled to rise, but before he could, Celine appeared, her wolf form regal and commanding. "This is over," she growled. "Leave now, or face your end." Victor hesitated, his gaze flickering between Celine and Janine. Finally, he turned and fled, his remaining rogues following close behind. As the pack regrouped, cheers erupted around Janine. She had proven herself, not just to the pack, but to herself. Adrian shifted back to his human form, his smile wide. "I told you, Janine, you had it in you all along." Janine smiled back, her heart swelling with pride and relief. The battle was over, but she knew their fight against Victor was far from finished. For now, though, they had won. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more delightful stories.